Thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation, Kevin. I also have very good memories of my time at Geary. And thank you all of you for participating to the seminar. So I can't see anyone. I will see just my slides. So this is a joint paper with Richard Dorset, Emma Gorman, and Min Zhan from the University of Westmister, and Greta Morando, who is currently at UCL. It's a paper about school perishability and youth custody. So I need to make a disclaimer before starting. We use for this work statistical data from the ONS, and using this data does not imply that the ONS gives any endorsement in relation to the analysis and interpretation of the statistical data. Okay. Okay, so let me give you a preview of the paper and telling you what's the story of the paper in a slide. So the research question is whether the peers' academic ability in secondary schools have any effect on the probability of ending up in custody at the age of 17, 18, so after the end of secondary school. And to answer this question, we're going to use the NPD, the National Pupil Database, which is an administrative data set on the population of all pupils in England in founded school. And we'll link this database with data on youth custody. We have this data for 4 cohorts of students, and that will help us with our identification strategy. Because we're looking at peer effects have quite a few challenges from an econometric point of view. In order to identify them, we use 2 strategies that have been used in the literature. The first one exploit the intransitivity in the network of peers, and is called peers of peers. So basically the instrument is the peers of peers ability. And basically it exploits the fact that your peers in secondary schools come from a variety of primary schools, and therefore the ability of peers in primary schools can be an instrument for the ability of peers in secondary schools. And then the second strategy used the schools and cohort fixed effect in order to control for selection of pupils into schools. The preliminary finding is that there is actually an effect of peers' ability on youth custody, and an increase in the standard deviation of academic ability of peers reduced custody by approximately 59%. The coefficient is very small because the extent to which we observe custody in our data is very big. It's very small as well, sorry. There are heterogeneous effects that we find. In particular, the effect is concentrated among people from the lower tail of the ability distribution, and coming from more disadvantaged family background. And in an attempt to understand some mediators for this effect, we also explore different outcomes. And in particular, we find that the ability of peers affects positively student grades, which is consistent with the literature, and negatively some behavior that might be disruptive or detrimental, such as absences. So that might kind of help shedding some light on the mechanism through which this peers' ability impact on youth custody. Why is this relevant? So the first reason why it's interesting is because youth custody is a stepstone leading to crime, and crime generates enormous cost to the society. For example, in England and Wales in 2015, the total cost of crime was estimated to be around 50 billion pounds for crime against individuals. The second reason has to do with the fact that youth custody, because it occurs during adolescence, interrupts the accumulation of human and social capital. And there are 2 channel through which that work. The first one is that usually people that end up in youth custody might end up reoffending again 1 year later. Data from England suggests that 69% of young adults reoffend within a year. So that might leads to greater criminal activity, but also the fact that people goes into custody prevent them from completing high school, and that might affect also potentially future wages. So there is a negative effect on the economy through this channel. And then finally, the young people in custody are disproportionately the most disadvantaged young people. If we look at their observable characteristics, they come from problematic childhood and family background. They are usually from ethnic minority. They have a history of care and mental health. They experience truancy or exclusion from school. So it's important to understand what are the determinants of youth custody to prevent adolescents from the negative consequences, but also to prevent people that are already disadvantaged from the consequences of custody. Literature. So there are two main strands of the literature we refer to. The first one is the literature, the educational literature that looks at peer effects in education and the impact that peer effects have on attainment. And here there are a multitude of research studies whose results show a fairly large range of estimates that reflect both the variety of educational settings and also the presence of non-linearities in peer effects. But there is a positive impact usually in this literature of abilities of peers on educational outcomes. And then there is a second strand of the literature that looks it's more like risky behavior and criminality. And here also the presence of social multipliers has been proven, especially in neighborhood and correctional facilities context, but also in schools. And what this literature found is that there is the similarity of peers in these networks is conducive to more risky behavior on the individual side. And basically what they measure it with is basically other characteristics of peers or behaviors of peers lead the individual to commit more risky behavior. The school literature, so the literature looks at peer effects and criminal outcomes in school settings is very limited, and it also looks at either characteristics of peers or measure of school quality. So what we try to do here is to bridge the gap between these two literature by linking them and looking at if there is an impact of the academic ability of peers on criminal outcomes. So we basically move away from looking at characteristics of peers and look at their observable characteristics that depend on their background, and instead look at the role of peers' ability on risky behavior. On the propensity to engage in criminal activity and then end up in custody. Why would their academic ability of peers influence the probability of custody? So what is the link between these two dimensions? The first one has to do with the fact that academic ability of peers has usually an effect on a student's academic achievement. And improving academic achievement can reduce the opportunity cost of engaging in crime, which is one of the main channels that leads people into criminal activity, the low opportunity cost. And then the other channel through which a better education can work is by improving some non-cognitive traits such as self-control and time discounting and decision-making that might lead to better decision, not risky decisions. And a second channel through which academic ability of peers might impact custody is through the by affecting the behavior of individuals. We know that disruptive behavior in primary school is predictive of disruptive behavior in secondary school. which might be predictive of further criminal activity later on in life. And therefore, if actually academic ability of peers affect this channel, it might then reduce the impact it has along the way. So let me introduce you to the institutional educational setting in the UK. I think it's slightly different from the one in Ireland, but similarly to the one in Ireland, it is organized in blocks of years, which are called key stages. So key stage 1 spans from the age of 5 to the age of 7, key stage 2 from the age of 7 to the age of 11, which is also called year 6. And when children leave primary education, so that's when children leave primary education and enter secondary education by changing school. And they're also tested on standard national test in 3 core subjects, math, science, and English. And this is called key stage 2 at year 11. And then from age 11 to age 14, they are in key stage 3, that was abolished after 2009. And then from age 14 to the age 16, they are in key stage 4, at the end of which, and this is year 11, they are assessed with the GCSE qualification, and after lower secondary they can move to higher secondary school and do the A level from the age of 16 to the age 18. So basically what we are using here is the ability composition of peers at key stage 4 GCSE at the age of 16, and how that impact outcomes at the age of 17-18 in terms of youth custody. So the data are coming from the National Pupil Database, which include all the population of pupils in all state-funded schools in England, and it has some control for some. It collects data on grades, prior attainments in different subjects, school identifier, and socioeconomic and demographic characteristics of the students. And we are using 4 cohorts of secondary school students who finished secondary school between 2011 to 2014. And then we obtain data on youth custody from the National Client Case Load Information System, which is merged to the National Pupil Database, the population of pupils, in order to identify which of these pupils then end up in custody at the age of 17 or 18. Okay, so the equation we're trying to estimate is the one written on the top of this slide, where YISD is a dummy equal to 1 if student I in school S in cohort T end up in custody at the age of 17-18. And the coefficient of interest is theta 2, which is associated with A bar. So this is the peer group average academic ability, which we measure with the key stage 4 in mathematics in secondary school, and it excludes key stage 4 of individual I. And then we control for a set of individual characteristics that are either fixed over time, such as gender, ethnicity, and English as an additional language, or they are determined in primary school and measured in primary school, so to avoid confounding from characteristics or dimensions that are secondary school specific. And these are free school meal, participation in education, health, and care plan, or identification of children that are looked after, children in need, or children under protection plan, children with special educational needs, absences before the age of 11, and prior attainments measured as key stage 1 and key stage 2. So of course, the problem here is the endogeneity of average peer group ability. And the main issues here are self-selection and the reflection problem. So self-selection has to do with the fact that individuals have some degree of choice over which school to enroll, and correlations between individual behaviors and peer characteristics might actually reflect some unobservable variable which is associated instead with the school of choice. So we would like to be able to control for that. The reflection problem states that it is impossible to distinguish the effect of peers on the individual from the effect of the individual on peers if both are determined simultaneously. So because of these two problems, we try to solve these two problems with four specifications that exploit two main identification strategies. The first one relies on variability across cohorts of students and exploit the fact that we have multiple cohorts of individuals, and there is a natural year-to-year random variation in the unobservable ability component of each cohort that allows us to control for fixed effect across different dimensions. It has been popularized by Oxby in different other papers also that she co-authored. And then the second specification, the other two specifications rely on the intransitivity in the network of peers, which is based on the fact that peers in secondary schools have attended a variety of primary schools, and therefore we can use peers in primary schools just to instrument average ability of peers in secondary schools, applying some exclusion that I'm going to talk about in a second. This strategy has been introduced by Bremullet et al. in 2009 and by De Giorgi et al. In 2010. Also, Nicoletti and others used this strategy, and Mendolia et al. Applied this strategy to the setting of education and look at peers and peer-to-peer, so the peer effect on educational outcomes by instrumenting peers' ability with the peers-to-peers ability. So the strategy is called peers-to-peers because you use the peers of peers of secondary school, peers in primary school as an instrument for peers in secondary school. I have a graph that is going to make it clear, I hope. Okay, so the first two specifications, as I said, rely on the fixed effect model. So the first equation include, in addition to what was included in the equation that I showed a couple of slides ago, some set of fixed effect. So in particular, tau identify all the cohort fixed effect that capture unobserved characteristics that are common to students born in the same year. P and sigma identify primary and secondary school fixed effect that capture preferences and other unobserved characteristics that are common to students who make the same choice over primary and secondary schooling over the years in our data. And then PS is identifying the primary to secondary school fixed effect. So this captures the unobservable characteristics of all the cohorts of pupils that move from the same primary to the same secondary schools. Okay, and this allows to remove all unobservable characteristics that are common to students that make the same choice over primary and secondary schoolings over the years. So including this fixed effect, eliminate the main unobservables that are a source of concern in our specification. The second specification, which I define as aggregate, has been employed by Gibbons and Teljai in 2016, in a paper where they try to assess the impact of peers' ability on educational outcomes. And what they do here, they eliminate high dimensional fixed effect from the previous specification by estimating a transform model that is based on primary school by secondary school by cohort cells. So what they do here is basically they collapse the data at the primary to secondary school transition by cohort level. So each cell include pupils that have been in the same primary and same secondary school, and that belong to the same cohort. So that has the advantage of removing the high dimensionality of the fixed effect without losing information on peer groups changes. Okay, the third specification, the third and fourth specification rely instead on the peer-to-peer strategy. So here, as I said, this strategy relies on the intransitivity of network, of peers network. So the fact that your networks in primary schools are not your networks in secondary schools, and therefore you can use these non-overlapping settings as instrument for your network in secondary schools. And in particular, we are instrumenting the ability of peers, which is measured as the average grade in math at key stage 4, with the ability of peers to peers, which is measured as the proportion of students in key stage 2 who achieved at least a grade of 5 in maths. We also try using English or the average between math and English, and we obtain the same results in all specifications. So that's not really affecting or driving our result. The equation tree is our first stage. So the average ability of peers in secondary school is instrumented by alpha bar JH minus I, and what is AJH. So that's the average ability of all the students who went to the same primary school J as those in the secondary school peer group, but then we moved to a different primary school. And we also have a minus I because we are excluding all children that went to the same primary school as the focal individual. I'm going to show you a graph that I think is more explanatory. Okay, so here we have a rectangular box with moon guys, earth guys, and cross guys who are in the same secondary school. So all the symbols guys in the box are in the same secondary school, but all the different colored circle identifies peers that went to the same primary school. So all the orange cross went to the same primary school, all the blue earth went to the same primary school, and all the green moon went to the same primary school. So assume that the focal student is one of the moon, and we want to instrument the average ability of the little filled blue art and filled orange cross. What we used the fact that these people went to different primary schools. So we use the average ability of the empty blue art peers as an instrument for the full blue art individuals. And we use the average ability of the empty cross orange guys as an instrument for the ability of the filled cross orange. Okay, so basically these strategies allow us to identify a channel through which like primary school peers can affect secondary school peers without directly affecting the individual of interest. So for the strategy to be valid, we need the instrument to be relevant. So we need the peer effects to exist in primary school. And there is evidence from the American literature, from the literature in the US and in Europe that there are actually peer effects in primary schools. There is no evidence from the UK, but I mean, there is no reason to think that there should not be, as evidence from other countries suggests so. And then the exclusion restriction implies that the peer-to-peer ability, so the ability of peers in primary schools, affects student I only through the ability of peers and not directly. So to do so, we basically restrict the primary peers pupil. The average is only restricted to primary peers pupils that attended a different primary school and a different secondary schools than the individual pupil in question. And the reason why we apply this restriction is to make sure that the peers of peers have not been in either the same primary school or the same secondary school as our individual of interest. And therefore, we can say that the ability of these early primary peers of later secondary schools peers does not affect directly the probability of an individual ending up in custody, if not through the effect that they have on the secondary school peers who are in the same secondary school of individual of interest. So basically what I'm saying here is that the instrument that we're using, so the empty cross, blue cross, and the empty blue heart, so the ability of these peers does not impact the ability of the full green moon, if not through the impact that they exert on their peers in the rectangle, which are filled. I hope it is clear, but let me know if not. So the specification number 3 use basically the peer-to-peer strategy, and then the problem of this specification is that it does not include control for fixed effect, for school fixed effect. If we include fixed effect, that will produce some exclusion bias, and which arises from the fact that the assignment of peers is done without replacement. So basically, individual I can be also his own peer, which also say differently, if we have a fixed effect, the contribution of individual I is encompassed in that fixed effect, and we don't want that basically. So in order to deviate from this problem, we compute fixed effect as deviation from the school mean and remove the individual contribution into this school mean. So this is called the leave one out school mean. So basically specification number 4 is identical to the previous one. It's a IV estimate, but in addition to the previous one, it includes a set of school level deviation from the mean fixed effect, which are identified by sigma delta. These characteristics are all secondary school level observable characteristics, but are all observed in primary school and are all computed as deviation from the leave one out mean. And we include prior achievement in Key Stage 1, ethnicity, English is not the main language, having been in care, and being a FSM, a free school meal pupil. And free school meal, I don't know if you use the same dichotomy, the same wording in Ireland as to do with children that come from deprived, income deprived family. So they are eligible for free school meal. Okay, so let's go into the data and see some result. So this is the table of descriptive statistics, and I divided here the observable characteristics for pupils in custody in the first 2 columns, and not in custody in the latter 2 columns. You can see that the percentage of pupils in custody in the sample is very, very small. It's 0.1% of the sample. However, they are also characterized by worse observable characteristics, worse or more disadvantaged observable characteristics, sorry. So in particular, there is a higher fraction of minorities, ethnic minority in people represented in people in custody. 3 times, less than 3 times, more than 2 times the proportion of free school meal individuals. Where the number is not reported, it is to do with the fact that the representation is less than 5%, and therefore, because these are sensitive data, we cannot report them. So the fraction of pupils in need are 8%, which is larger than in students not in custody. Also, the presence of students with educational needs is more than double. The proportion is more than double among children in custody than among children not in custody. The IDACHI score is higher. So the IDACHI score is the Income Deprivation Affected Children Index. And it measured the proportion of all children that are aged between 0 to 15 who lives in income deprived family. So the higher the number, the more basically deprived is the group. And then when looking at Key Stage 4, Key Stage 2, and Key Stage 1, you can see that the standardized score with 0 mean have all less than 0 values in the column for pupils in custody. The second table shows you the numbers we're working on in the school numbers. So we are working with 16,500 primary schools and 3,300 secondary schools. The number of pupils that went to the same primary school in a given cohort is about 43. And the number of pupils that went to the same secondary school in a given cohort is about 180. So we cannot measure class. We don't have identification of which class pupils attended, so we cannot measure the peer group reference to the class level, but we use all pupils in the same year group in the same school. So the peers in secondary schools are about, on average, 180, and the peers of peers instead are about 42, 43, okay? Okay, so these are the results of the first specification. The linear probability model, including a variety of fixed effects. And so all models include students' characteristics, and then they model different by the type of fixed effect that we control for. They also include all cohort fixed effect. The second column include also secondary school fixed effect. And you can see that by including them, the level of significativity dropped significantly from the first column to the second column, even if the coefficient stays the same. And that's because a lot of variability is taken up by the secondary school fixed effect. When we also add primary school fixed effect, and that's column 4, the level of significativity increase, but also the coefficient rise. And then the last column includes also dummies for pupils who went to the same primary and the same secondary school. And here the coefficient is the largest and significant. So it's also very small, as I said, because the outcome variable is 1 in 0.1% of the cases. So that's why the coefficient is small, but the impact when relativized to the size of the outcome is quite substantial. The second specification is the aggregate specification, where basically we estimated the transform model at the level of cells that are collapses for pupils that went from the same primary to the same secondary school in a given cohort. And here the impact is much larger than in the previous specification. It's 3 times larger. So this specification estimate impact related to the variation in difference group means. So it might capture differently measured change, and it also doesn't account for all individual level variability. So that might explain the fact that the coefficient is much larger here. And then the results of specification 3 and 4, which are the IV specification, are in this table. So here, basically, specification number 1 is the simple IV without controlling for any school level fixed effect, computed as a Lee one-out mean. You can see that the coefficient of the IV specification, minus 0.00032, in column 1 is exactly the same as the coefficient we have in column 5 of the linear probability model plus fixed effect. So the two specifications provide a similar, exactly the same size coefficient. Instead, when we add the aggregate level Lee one-out means, so the school level characteristics that somehow resemble school level, secondary school fixed effect, but do not suffer from exclusion bias, the size of the coefficient almost double. We take the last specification as our preferred one, as this one is controlling for a variety of secondary school characteristics without the individual contribution to them. So that's the impact that's the reduction effect of peer effect on probability of custody, minus 0.00056, which is about 58% of the impact. So in this table, I'm showing heterogeneity of the effects. So we're looking at whether the impact differ for different groups of individuals. And in particular, we look at ability as measured by key stage 2. And here we have low ability, medium ability, and high ability. And we can see that the effect is mostly concentrated on pupils from very low ability. And then the last two columns report the impact of the specification, the IV specification plus the aggregate Lee one-out means characteristics by free school meal status. And it shows that the impact again is concentrated among children who are free school meals. So basically we can say that the positive impact of peers' ability is mostly concentrated on reducing the probability of custody, is mostly concentrated on young people who have the lowest ability level and who comes from the most disadvantaged background. And then we try to understand what are the mediators or the mechanism of these effects. So why does peers' ability matter and reduce the probability of custody? And as I said at the beginning, there are two potential mechanisms. One is the fact that peers' ability affect achievement, and better educational achievement reduce both the opportunity cost of crime, but also improves non-cognitive traits that are associated with better decision-making. And the first two columns here shows what is the role of peer effect on academic achievement of individual in key stage 4 in both math and English, and we actually see that there is a significant effect. So the table here shows both the second stage in the first three rows, sorry, and then in the second part we also show the coefficient of peer-to-peer ability, so it's the first stage regression. So we basically can say that there is an impact of peers' ability on attainment that might explain why better ability peers induce individuals to, reduce the probability of an individual of being in custody. And then we also look at a range of disruptive behavior. That was our second potential mechanism, whether better ability peers also reduce the propensity to engage in risky behavior, and therefore that by affecting that channel, reducing the probability of ending up in custody. And here we look at, I'm only reporting a couple of the reason for permanent exclusion, and none of them significant. And then we also have unauthorized leave so absences, and we find that better ability peers have a substantial negative impact on unauthorized absences. So somehow it does contribute reducing one of the behavior that might be considered disruptive or not conducive to better educational outcomes, such as absences. Okay, let me conclude here. So it is important to understand what are the determinants of youth custody, because that helps preventing young adults from the negative consequences associated with it, which is high cost of crime, interruption of human and social capital accumulation, a risk of ending up in the crime trajectory for a longer period. It has to be noticed that we are looking at an outcome which is a short time horizon. So we're looking at custody at the age of 17, 18, which is first measured only if the individual is caught committing crime. So there is an underestimation probably of criminality or risky behavior. And it's also a very short horizon, because we are looking at custody at the age of 17, 18, and peer stability is measured at the age of 16. It is also important that we cannot really disentangle the role of peer stability versus other characteristics of peers, because it's difficult to separate the effect of peer stability from other peers characteristics, for example, behavior, that might be correlated and lead to the same result. Having said that, we find a quite substantial impact of academic ability of peers on reduction of custody. It's 59%. It seems like a very large effect, but also take into account that academic ability is measured as an average in a group, and therefore one increase in standard deviation is quite a big increase. And what are the implications? So the implication in terms of policy have to do with school sorting, and the suggestion to reduce school segregation in order to reduce crime by increasing the formation of more virtuous peer networks and less difficult ones, basically. Yeah, I completed my presentation.